Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm Ken Krutsch, and with me here is Rachel Abernathy. And then on the other screen, you see Emma Aversa. So we're going to share some slides for you, and we're pretty short on time here, so we're just gonna pile right into it. Hopefully this all just works. So, all right, so I get the screen sharing running here. All right. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Okay. Good morning, everyone. So the slide you're looking at, the first user study I participated in had a lab setting that looked a lot like this. There was an empty room, a one-way mirror for observers, an empty desk except for a desktop computer. There was a second chair with a proctor in it, literally with a clipboard and a pencil. The proctor would read out each task and sort of like a school teacher would quietly note pass or fail. All the test subjects were visibly nervous, and any problems they had with our software, they pretty much blamed on themselves. And in short, the test was worthless. If you take anything away from this presentation, please remember this, that a user study is about discovery. You have the opportunity to let an outside set of eyes show you what works and what needs improvement. And all you need to do is watch, listen, and learn. So keep things relaxed, informal, let the study subjects have some fun.
So let's talk about what is a user study. So in theory, it's this definition on the left. It's when a facilitator asks a participant to complete a set of tasks using a specific interface while observing their behavior, listening for feedback, and learning problems or opportunities within the design. In practice, it's going to look a little bit like the images on the right. That bottom left image is what it really looks like now when we're doing everything remotely. It's involving some kind of screen share or conferencing software, Zoom, WebEx, Skype. We're all so familiar with them now. Ideally, you have cameras on both the proctor and the user so that you can have more of a conversation, but more importantly, you can see the user's body language. You can see their facial expressions as you're asking questions and watching them interact. And also, ideally, you're then recording that session so you can refer back to it for notes. In the before times, as we were talking about before, we had in-person user studies where they would look like something on that bottom right image. Nothing fancy, just a camera on a tripod pointed at a device and the interface that you're observing somebody interacting with. It could also look like that image on the top right. That was a user study we did for the Mayo Clinic. And again, nothing fancy, just a camera on a tripod, but you want to see the environment the user is interacting with your product. In that particular study, we were observing women interacting with 30 years of legacy software and some of the convoluted and complex workflows that they had worked out when they were trying to complete different tasks. And finally, that top left image, that was a user study we did for some retired athletes. If you recognize that man, it's Chuck Foreman, former Viking. But you can imagine that the kinds of questions and the kinds of findings we had with retired athletes were very different than the findings we had for that bottom right image, that bottom right user study, which had a more millennial and tech-savvy user base. So why conduct a user study? The short of it is that you want to identify problems. Those problems then become opportunities to better your product, and you can create stronger solutions because you've taken the time to learn about your users. In those previous user studies, we uncovered problems where the user couldn't complete a task, or they navigated to a different area of the app than we anticipated. All of these are problems that then become opportunities for bettering the user experience. The biggest reason to do a user study is what we call these eureka moments. And we'll share some of these later, but these are moments that end up being significant findings that will be important design directors and design drivers for big changes within your product. And a lot of these eureka moments end up resulting in design changes that will be your product differentiators down the line. So again, we'll show you some of those moments at the end.
Alrighty, so you're going to start with your core elements of usability testing. So you'll have a facilitator, and this is the individual that's going to guide your participants through the entire test process. You'll have an established task list, and these will be realistic activities that the participant might actually perform in real life. And then, of course, you have your participant. And this is a realistic user of the product or the service being studied. And you need to understand your problem domain. So you can start with workshop sessions and a heuristic review. You'll interview product owners, sales, and support. And this is really important because you want to learn your subject's language. So are they using terms like dashboard or upload certificate or credentials? And it's important for those interview sessions that you'll have with them, just so you can familiarize yourself with that language and apply it appropriately. And you'll define your user roles. So these are people who interact with the product, the interface, or the system. So for example, maybe you have an admin, a director, and then your individual. And then building out your task list. So these are going to be common tasks per user role. You'll study specific workflows and analyze them. You can compare the current workflow versus an ideal workflow. To the right, we have an example of a task list. Perhaps you want your user to navigate to a specific page. Maybe you need them to upload a photo. They probably need to turn on their camera if you're doing it virtually. And then you'll also build your question list. And these are going to be informal interview questions about the use, perceptions, and feelings. So for example, maybe you're going to ask your user how often they use the product, what's their favorite part about it, is there something that they wish they could do that they currently can't with it. And of course, you need your participants. We find that 6 to 12 users for each use type is sufficient. We notice that the common problems tend to occur over and over throughout a user study, and findings by the Nielsen-Norman group also support this. If you can, it's important to get real customers, but sometimes that's a little difficult, so you can use online tools like Userlytics to help recruit people. And these participants, they can be voluntary or compensated. That'll really just differ based on the project. And then now you're going to collect your user info, collect the contact info, their availability. Tools like Airtable and Google Forms are really good for this. You'll select a remote conferencing tool like Zoom, so you're able to record a session, screen share, and have all cameras on. Of course, you need to schedule your interviews, so you'll send out your calendar invites, send out the reminder emails, and do some test calls if needed to work out any kinks before the actual interviews.
Okay, how to watch. So as demonstrated in Ken's story at the beginning, you really want to ditch the lab environment. The best user studies happen when both participant and proctor are relaxed and comfortable and having more of a conversation. That's when everybody starts to open up. And that's not going to happen in a lab-like setting where it's a sterile setting. You should also, we advocate, I should say, for observing subjects one-on-one. We really prefer qualitative over quantitative feedback. Again, you want it to be more of a conversation. You want to find out those perceptions that the user has that they can't necessarily voice through a different format. Say no to focus groups. We don't like focus groups very much because we find that usually there's 1 or 2 people within the group that maybe it's a bit more opinionated or a bit more forceful, and they just kind of commandeer the entire conversation, and it ends up being more of a groupthink kind of method, and that's not reliable or helpful research. Additionally, usually when a user is interacting with an interface or an application, it's more of a one-on-one setting and not a group setting. So focus groups tend to not reflect the natural environment that somebody's interacting with your product. Pay attention to how the user interacts with the app. This is more than just clicking around. This is also taking note of different behavioral patterns that they have. Maybe they hover over different things or second guess themselves. These are all important items to take into consideration for your design process. Watch their body language as well. This is, again, why you want to have cameras on when you're doing a user study virtually, so that you can see if they're tense, if they're frustrated, if they're really relaxed and at ease while they're using this application. All of that plays into the bigger picture that you're getting out of this user study. How to listen. So stop analyzing and note-taking. When you're scribbling during a user study, the user can tell that you're a little detached and will often pull away, and that's not going to result in good feedback. As we mentioned before, especially virtually and in person, you want to record the session so that you can refer back to it for note-taking and also for reflecting on some of those eureka moments or tidbits to take away for your design process. Listen to the user's actions. This one's really important. You want to pay attention to when the user, what they're saying doesn't match what they're doing. And I'll give you an example. We did a user study for a particular record-keeping application where users could upload certificates and track progress and verifications. And while we were interviewing our users, we would ask them their perception about the application. How do you feel? How do you feel about the experience? And they would say things like, it's really easy to use, it's straightforward. But then as we observed what they were doing, it would take them 10 clicks to get to the point where they could complete a task because they didn't know where anything was located. That was a moment where what they were saying didn't match what they were doing. So that was a big indicator that we had an opportunity to create that more usable experience for the user. Listen to the user's comments. Again, if you're doing this in an environment where everyone's relaxed and it's more of a conversation, pay attention to some of these comments, which could be offhand comments. Maybe the user is struggling to complete a task and they might say something like, oh, I'm not good with technology. That comment is a big indicator as to how they feel about, or how they feel about themselves while they're using your app. As a product owner, you don't want the user to feel like they're not good at technology while using your product. So that's a big opportunity to improve that experience and to really flip that emotion that your user is having while interacting with your interface. Another important point is to always ask the user to narrate their thoughts while they're clicking through your different tasks. This will give you a lot of insight into their thought process. So if they navigate one place and can't find what they're looking for, they can narrate their thoughts as to why they maybe chose another area to check out instead. And it's that thought process that will be really important when you're trying to organize your new design or make some design decisions. Listen to the user's tone. Similar to body language, tone will tell you a lot about how the user's actually feeling. Are they frustrated, even though what they're saying might be a happy comment? Are they really excited about something? Tone will tell you a lot about their emotions. And finally, for listening, a good UX researcher doesn't like to listen to themselves talk. Again, to reiterate, you really want to let the user drive the session. How to learn. So it's important to learn from people's experiences. Ask the user about their background. An important thing to know is how their previous experiences inform the way they're interacting with your app now. For example, maybe a user was an accountant in a former life. Well, that would give you a lot of insight into why they're so adept at clicking through this data entry app. And that'll change the lens through which you're viewing the entire session. Let the user get off task. That's also important to keep in mind. Even though you come armed with your task list that Rachel talked about and your set of questions, it's okay to let the user get off task. That shows that they're comfortable with you and that it's more of a conversation. And it's also where you often find some of the best design gold moments because they're going somewhere that's natural for them, or they're navigating to a point in the conversation or the interface that they're excited about or they have problems with. So it's okay to let the user get off task. Observe the user's surroundings. Again, that's important. An important point as to why you need a camera, either trained on the device or having it on during screen share. You want to get a sense for the environment that they're in when they're using your application, because that informs their experience. Are there kids screaming in the background? Are they flipping between a bunch of devices? Is it a super dark room? All of this goes into the entire experience. And of course, ultimately, keep everything relaxed. That's when you're going to get the best feedback.
Alrighty, so now you're going to collect your observations. So you can start by reviewing your recordings and then you can make some annotated notes with a timestamp. You could go a step further and group your observations by type and category. So here we have an example of just a rough outline. We've gone and annotated a video. We've got our timestamp, and then we've highlighted some quick notes, and then we'll take this and use it as an outline for a highlight reel. And here is an example using Airtable, how you could categorize things a little further. So if you wanted to take some more in-depth notes about what the user was saying or their thoughts, you could put that here and organize it. So some questions that help guide your observations. What did the user say versus what did they do? Kind of what Emma was explaining. Do the actions match what they're actually saying? Where did they struggle? What came easily? Did they take any shortcuts? Did they improvise any workflow? Take note of your user setup. It's important to know if they're on a desktop or if they're using a tablet. Do they have multiple screens available to them? And of course, your observation that matters most is, could your user complete the task? So now you're going to build a summary and highlight reel. You'll take those observations. They serve as a roadmap for developing feature sets and workflow. You'll build your highlight reel with potent clips from user studies and group clips built around an observation. So if people struggle with a key application task, you'll want to focus on that. For example, if you ask your users to update their contact information and all of them failed, you want to highlight that. Your highlight reel forms buy-in from clients and team members. So watching users struggle, it gets everybody on the same page. So just an example of an observation here, we have overall users have an overwhelming support of the system and its goal, so much so that they're willing to learn and live with the system's quirks. However, even though they say that they love the system, they don't use it for its core purposes like finding trainings or managing employee records. They often create their own system. And here we just have an example of a highlight reel we did. So we have our observation for manual systems for tracking hours. We can see that both the proctor and the user have their cameras turned on. Our user has enabled screen sharing, and then it's important you'll want to include your user's role as well as their name.
So why do user studies work? Well, the most important thing they do is they save money in the long run. Basically, you're solving the right problem. They build user loyalty because you're building a product that fits your users' needs, which creates positive brand association. For me, the most important thing, though, is it makes the design process more productive. When you're using observations to back design decisions and directions, I like to use the phrase, I think is replaced with we've observed. Basically, you're replacing ego and opinion with subjective observation. Now, I want to talk just for a minute about rebuttal points. When you maybe propose doing a user study to your management team, these are the three that you'll get. One of them is, we know our users. Well, I will tell you that every time we run a user test, we discover something important that none of the stakeholders knew about their users, and I'll show you some of those in the anecdotes in a minute. We don't have time. So you're talking about a couple of weeks of work, talking to your customers, frankly, which the sales guys love, before embarking on a year-long development project. And we don't have the budget. I would say, see the point above. I mean, really, what does it cost to build the wrong product? So just a couple of points here before we wrap up. This is an example of one where we call device mix-up. We were doing a user study for a consumer electronics product. This box was it was a smart energy initiative. A box would ship to end customers, and there were two sort of little black boxes in there, and they look so similar that what customers would do is they'd rip open the box, they'd take the little black boxes out, set them on the table, and then when they'd go back to it, they'd mix up which one did which. So they'd be setting up product A using the product B instructions and vice versa. Something nobody anticipated when we were doing the design work. Poor performance. We did a user study here for an existing product, and we went and talked to some people in the field, and I was observing someone doing something with a storage area network, and they'd start a task, and then they'd get up and go to get coffee. And they were so used to such poor product responsiveness that anytime they started any task, that was the time to get up and take a break. Again, the client had no idea any of this was going on. Frustration. We did a user study for MTV Networks a number of years ago, where basically it was a data entry product designed to do media rights management, and the users of it were so frustrated that at one point, one of the guys turned to me and said, "This effing system makes me feel stupid." And he was using Excel basically to enter in all his data and then copying and pasting it into a data entry app. Misperception. This is a recent one. We built a video conferencing app. Basically, it was an app so that people could connect through two-way video chat. But the product audience, in many cases, were not skilled in using services like Zoom, or like what we're on right now, right, where we all kind of connect into a service and then join a conference. And so these people were like putting the phone on a table next to them, waiting for it to ring, instead of actively joining a conference. Thank you so much for your time. Much appreciated. And I will stop screen sharing. And I don't know if there's any way for us to take questions or not, but I don't know if anyone else is going to come on either. But we are done.
No questions?
No questions so far. All right.
Okay.
Looking forward to my MinneBar15 t-shirt to add to my collection.
Yeah. Yeah.
No questions, really, out of all of this? I mean, has anyone out there, it looks like we have 3 minutes left, has anyone out there done a user study before in support of a product that they're working on?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, recording is key. Yep. Also helps sharing voice of the customer later with product teams. Yeah, so somebody mentioned about voice of the customer later with product teams. It's really super key to build the highlight reel is everything. It is kind of, it's like a summary collection of observations you've made with people working with the product. And it's really important when you build your highlight reel to separate them out by functional category, if you will, kind of like what both Emma and Rachel were describing. So you can talk about, hey, here's the login process, and it has a lot of friction, and here's what's happening to users trying to onboard and stuff like that.
Yeah.
How do you handle clients that don't want to do research? Well, we handle them with those rebuttal points. I get them every time. In fact, we've reached a point now where we will turn away clients that refuse to do any kind of user study or analysis as part of product design. I've been involved in too many projects over the course of my career where nobody bothered to talk to the customer. You spend a lot of time and money building the wrong thing, and everybody gets seriously pissed off. And I just don't, life's too short, I won't do it anymore. Do you have any tricks you use to keep yourself from sharing too much information about the product? I don't know if I've never had a case where sharing too much information about the product was a problem. In general, as Emma was describing earlier, you want to create a casual conversation, and if they start asking questions about the product, I don't know, why not? I mean, if you're already running a user test, you're far enough along where you're probably about ready to launch anyway, and I don't know if really anything's a secret anymore. Great questions. Any books on the topic you recommend? No, I don't have any books, but I think the day of writing books on UX is over with. But I would recommend going to the Nielsen Norman Group or nngroup.com.
Mm-hmm.
They have just a monstrous pile of white papers and studies and whatnot, many of which are free, some of which you have to pay for, but really it is an amazing collection of research on what works and what doesn't for doing user studies. And what's interesting about NNG is they've been around for so long that they have longitudinal studies that go back 20 years, right, where they continue to examine, for example, how people read content on the web. It's a great source.
Great.
All right, thanks everyone.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Bye-bye.